It was raining when Emily Carter arrived in Seattle, a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the windows of her rented car and matched the quiet storm inside her. At 31, she had left behind a failed marriage in Boston, a cheating ex-husband, and a townhouse full of memories she no longer wanted. She needed distance, peace, and a place where no one knew her name. Seattle had always felt like a fresh start kind of city, rainy, slow-paced, a little mysterious. She didn't have family there, just a job offer from a boutique marketing firm, and a promise she made to herself: never fall for anyone who makes you feel like you're not enough again. Her budget was tight. When she found the 2-bedroom rental just outside the city, a charming craftsman house with ivy climbing up the porch and old wood floors that creaked like secrets, she took it without thinking twice. The catch: landlord insisted it was a shared lease. The other tenant was already living there. His name was Aidan Ross. She hadn't met him, only exchanged brief emails. Polite, distant, professional. The kind of tone that made her imagine an older man, maybe a quiet divorcee like her, someone who wouldn't get in her way. That was fine. She wasn't looking for friendship. She just wanted space to heal. But when she arrived that afternoon, suitcase dragging behind her, she didn't find an older man. Aidan was 34, tall, with quiet green eyes and a rugged sort of handsomeness. His dark hair was still damp from the shower. He wore a fitted black t-shirt and faded jeans, barefoot on the wooden floor. He greeted her with a nod and a firm handshake, his voice low and calm. No smile, just a short welcome, like she was checking into a hotel, not moving into the same house. It wasn't cold exactly, just ... guarded. The whole encounter lasted 3 minutes before he disappeared into his room and closed the door. And that's how it was for the first few weeks. They were strangers sharing the same walls. She'd hear him moving around early in the morning, leaving for work before sunrise. He worked in tech. She remembered reading in the lease details, some kind of senior software engineer. He worked long hours, and when he came home, he was silent. No small talk, no lingering in the kitchen. They crossed paths in the hallway. He gave a polite nod and kept walking. It was strangely intimate and distant all at once, living with someone you didn't really know but saw every day. Emily kept to herself, too. She was still unpacking the weight of her own heartbreaks. Nights she'd sit on her bed, wrapped in a blanket, wondering how she ever let her ex-husband make her feel invisible. She had spent years trying to fix a marriage where love had already died. And now, here she was, starting over, scared of opening up to anyone again. Still, there was something comforting about Aidan's quiet presence. He didn't ask questions. He didn't flirt or invade her space. He respected her silence. Okay? And strangely, that made her notice him more. His routines. It's the way he always made tea around 10 p.m., the smell of his cologne after a shower clean. Masculine, subtle. How he sat in the corner of the living room on weekends, reading actual books, not scrolling on his phone. She found herself wondering about him. Who hurt him? Why did he carry such stillness like a shield? One night, she found his jacket draped over a chair and caught herself running her fingers along the fabric. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was something quieter, a curiosity, a slow blooming awareness. Then came the first moment that changed things. It was a Thursday evening. She had a bad day at work, fought with a client over a failed campaign, then dropped a wine glass in the kitchen. It shattered loudly, glass spraying everywhere. She stood there barefoot, frozen, suddenly overwhelmed. Her chest tightened. The tears came fast, ugly, messy sobs she hadn't planned for. And that's when Aidan walked in. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at Horelli, looked at her hand, then moved quietly to grab the broom, swept up the glass, then gently handed her a towel for her feet. He poured her a mug of coffee, placed it on the counter, and leaned against the doorway. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She nodded, but he didn't walk away. He stayed there, drinking his own coffee, letting the silence do the talking. That night, they didn't become friends. But something shifted. A kind of invisible thread was tied between them in that small moment. Aiden saw her not the polished version she tried to show the world, but the broken, crying woman with red eyes and shaking hands. And he didn't turn away. In that house, filled with quiet evenings and echoing footsteps, two strangers were beginning to see each other not as roommates. Something else. Something neither of them wanted to admit just yet. Something that felt a little like fate. Asterisk. It started with something smaller, coffee cup, placed gently in front of her. But for Emily, that moment lingered like a quiet song in her chest. After that rainy night in the kitchen, something unspoken had begun to shift between her and Aiden. They didn't talk about it. Neither of them brought it up. But the next morning, when she walked into the kitchen and found a clean mug sitting beside the coffee pot, already waiting for her, she smiled for the first time in weeks. He had noticed, and that meant something. Slowly, the silence between them wasn't so heavy. It wasn't cold. Started to feel like a kind of comfort. They stopped avoiding each other in the hallway. Now they'd nod and sometimes offer a quiet hey. Then a shared joke about the noisy neighbors. Then a quick laugh over the broken dryer in the laundry room. It was like learning how to breathe again, just in each other's presence. One evening, she made too much stir-fry and asked if he wanted some. He hesitated at first, then sat across from her at the dining table and thanked her. They didn't talk much that night, just ate quietly, side by side, but when she glanced up, she caught him watching her. Not in a creepy way. It was soft, almost curious. Like he was trying to figure her out without scaring her off. She didn't look away. She let him look. And she looked back soon. Little things started to happen. They both worked long hours, but they'd sometimes cross paths at night and linger in the kitchen a little longer than necessary. She found herself looking forward to those moments. His tired smile. The way he leaned against the counter and told her dry little stories about his coworkers. He had a surprisingly funny side when he let his guard down. And Aiden started too. Notice her tooth, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. How she always hummed when she was cooking. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was trying to avoid crying. There was something so real about her. She wasn't pretending. And that made her beautiful. One Saturday, it rained all day. She was curled up on the couch in a blanket, watching an old movie when he came in. She offered him a seat without a word. He sat down, not too close, but not far either. For a while, they just watched. Then they talked. About little things, movies, music, food. Then deeper things, family, childhood, how fast life seemed to be moving. She told him about her favorite place in Boston, a bench near the river where she used to sit and think. He told her about the lake near his parents' cabin in Montana, where he used to watch the stars at night. These weren't just stories, they were pieces of each other. They were giving them freely. That night, when the movie ended, she fell asleep on the couch. Aiden didn't wake her. He didn't touch her. He just watched her for a moment, then quietly got up, grabbed a blanket, and covered her. In the morning, she found a note beside the coffee mug. Didn't want to wake you. You looked peaceful. Her heart clenched. That simple note felt more intimate than any love letter she'd ever received, because it was real. It was thoughtful. It meant he saw her not just as someone living in the next room, but as a woman who had been hurt and was slowly learning how to trust again. From then on, there was no denying something was blooming between them. Not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, patient, like light slipping through the cracks of a dark room. They didn't talk about feelings. It didn't flirt. But there were glances that lasted a little too long. Fingers that brushed too often in the kitchen. Cheered. Laughter that made her cheeks flush, made him shift in his seat like he didn't know what to do with the warmth rising in him. And yet nothing physical happened. No kiss, no touches beyond what could still be passed off as accidental. But the air between them grew heavier every day, charged, tense in the most beautiful, unbearable way. Emily found herself thinking about him at work, wondering what he was doing, what he was thinking. She began wearing her hair differently, noticing what he seemed to look at longer. Aidan, for his part, stayed quiet but attentive. He noticed her moods. When she was quiet, he gave her space. When she laughed, he let himself smile with her, like it was a gift. They were still strangers in the eyes of the world. Two adults living in one house by chance. But behind those walls, something deeper had started to grow, slow, uncertain, and undeniably real. It wasn't just attraction, it was connection. It was emotional intimacy. And neither of them knew where it would lead. But both were afraid to stop it, because sometimes when life shatters your heart, the pieces don't come back the same. Sometimes they come back softer, stronger, and ready for something more. Sometimes everything changes in a single nightstand for Emily and Aidan. That night came in early December. The air had turned sharp and cold, with rain tapping against the windows like whispers of something coming. Emily had stayed home late. From work, curled up on the couch with a blanket and her laptop, trying to meet a deadline. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak in the wood. The kind of silence that made you feel every beat of your heart. She didn't expect Aidan home anytime soon, but then, just after 9 p.m., she heard the door open and footsteps, she knew by now. Heavy, tired, and somehow familiar. He walked in, soaked from the rain, his hoodie dripping, hair flattened, his usually composed face tight with frustration. Without saying much, he dropped his bag by the door and ran a hand through his hair. Emily stood up, concerned, and met him in the hallway. "Rough day?" she asked gently. Aidan let out a low, tired laugh. "That's putting it nicely. Stew's still warm in the kitchen," she said. "Want some?" He hesitated, then nodded. In the kitchen, they sat across from each other, sharing quiet spoonfuls. The lights were low. The atmosphere felt heavy, not uncomfortable, but full of unspoken things. Emily watched him. He looked like he had something on his mind, something deeper than work stress. And for the first time since they met, he looked like he was ready to share it. "You ever feel like you're just existing?" he asked suddenly. Voice low. Emily blinked, surprised by the question. "All the time," she replied, "especially after the divorce. Some days I didn't even recognize myself in the mirror." Aidan nodded slowly, like he understood that all too well. Then, without looking at her, he said her name was Claire, my fiancée. "She died 3 years ago." The words hung in the air like smoke. Emily felt her breath catch. She didn't know what to say. "She was driving to surprise me at work," he continued. "We were supposed to have dinner. She got hit by a drunk driver, died instantly." Aidan didn't cry. His voice broke just a little. That small crack made her eyes sting. "I blamed myself. Still do, sometimes. I stayed late at work that night. If I hadn't, maybe she wouldn't have been on the road." Emily reached across the table, gently placed her hand over his. It was a soft touch, but full of meaning. "You can't live your life carrying that weight alone," she whispered. He looked up at her then, really looked. And there it was, the pain, the vulnerability, the years of holding it all in. In return, she told him about her ex-husband. About how he'd slowly stopped loving her, how he cheated, lied, and made her feel invisible. She told him how she stayed too long, hoping things would change, afraid of being alone. How she finally left because she realized she had already been alone for years, and in that quiet kitchen, two broken people laid their hearts bare. Then came the silence, the kind that isn't awkward, but full of emotion. And then it happened. Aidan stood up slowly, walked around the table, and paused beside her. Emily looked up, breath shaky, heart pounding. His fingers brushed her cheek. He leaned down, lips inches from hers. She could have pulled away. She didn't. The kiss was soft at first, uncertain, almost like a question. But when she kissed him back, it deepened. It wasn't about passion or heat. It was about everything they had carried alone for too long. Pain, longing, fear, hope. His hands cradled her face as if she were something fragile. her fingers tangled in his hoodie, pulling him closer, when they finally pulled apart their foreheads. Rested together, breaths mingling. No words were needed. That night they didn't go to separate rooms. They moved together gently, as if trying not to scare the moment away. The physical part wasn't rushed or wild, it was slow, careful, and full of emotions they didn't fully understand yet. Each kiss, each touch, felt like they were trying to heal something broken inside the other. There was trust in every movement, a silent promise neither of them had planned to make. And when it was over, they stayed wrapped in each other, under the covers, listening to the rain as it tapped against the window. Emily lay with her head on Aiden's chest, her fingers drawing small circles on his skin, his arms pulling her in like she belonged there in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. He looked at her and whispered, "I don't know what this is, but it feels real." She smiled, eyes closing. "Me too." Neither of them knew where it would go. But for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel like strangers. In the quiet darkness of that room, something had changed. Something had begun. It wasn't just one night. It was the beginning of something deeper. After that night. Everything between Emily and Aiden felt different. Softer, deeper, more fragile than before. They weren't just roommates anymore. They weren't just two people trying to survive their pasts. Now there were shared glances that lasted longer. Hands that found each other in the kitchen without saying a word. And the quiet rhythm of two broken hearts that had begun to beat in sync. But with that closeness came something else to fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing, of needing too much, too fast. They didn't label it. They didn't talk about what they were. And maybe that was the mistake. At first, it was enough, just to be near each other. Emily would wake up to find Aiden already gone to work, but she'd smile when she saw a note on the fridge. Made coffee. Have a good day. On weekends, they'd sleep in, tangled in blankets, whispering things they hadn't shared with anyone else. It was beautiful. It was quiet, but it was also temporary. Because neither of them had asked the question that was starting to grow louder in Emily's heart. What are we building here? And was Aiden building it with her? Or just living in the moment? One night, they went to a small jazz bar downtown. Emily had always loved the feeling of live music, the kind that made you feel like time was moving slower. She wore a soft black dress, nothing too fancy, but Aiden looked at her like she was something unreal. He reached for her hand during the second set and didn't let go. It felt like something was blooming again, this time with laughter, music, and wine. That night, walking back to the car, Aiden kissed her like he couldn't wait another second. They made love slowly when they got home, as if memorizing each other all over again. But the next morning, he was quiet. Distant. She asked if everything was okay, and he gave the classic answer, "Yeah, just tired." But she knew something had shifted. Days passed, then a week. He was still kind, still there, but somehow not fully present anymore. He worked later hours, avoided long conversations, and when Emily asked if they could talk, he brushed it off. "It's not a big deal," he'd say. But it was. She could feel it. His silence had returned like a wall, and she didn't know how to climb it this time. One evening, after he left his phone on the kitchen counter, a message flashed across the screen. Emily didn't mean to look, but it lit up again and again. The name read, Sophie. She hesitated. Then the message popped up clearly, "Still thinking about that weekend. I miss you." Her heart dropped. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Sophie. A weekend. Emily stepped back, stunned, chest tight. She didn't open the phone. She didn't have to. Everything inside her screamed that it wasn't just a friend. It wasn't just a conversation. He'd told her about Claire. He'd told her he hadn't dated anyone seriously since her death. But he hadn't told her about this. Whoever Sophie was, it was clear Aiden had been holding something back. When he got home that night, she didn't wait. "Who's Sophie?" she asked. Standing in the middle of the kitchen, trying to hold herself together, Aiden froze. His expression gave it all away. He sighed, rubbed his face, and finally said, "It's someone I dated. Briefly, before you moved in, it didn't mean anything." "But she still texts you," Emily said quietly. "She misses you." "That doesn't sound like nothing." Aiden looked at her, conflicted. "It weren't serious. I didn't think it mattered. But you didn't tell me," she said. "You let me fall for you while you were still figuring out if someone else meant something." Aiden's silence was worse than anything he could have said. Emily didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just nodded slowly and said, "I need space." And she meant it. That night she slept in her own bed again. For the first time in weeks. Alone. The next few days were quiet. Aiden tried to talk to her, but she pulled away. She couldn't pretend it didn't hurt. She didn't care if Sophie had come before her. What mattered was that he hadn't been honest. And for someone like Emily, who had been lied to for years in her marriage, even small betrayals felt like deep wounds. But something in Aiden changed too. He didn't run. He stayed. He cooked for her, left notes, gave her space without vanishing. And every time he passed her in the hallway, he looked at her like he hated himself for making her doubt him. They were still under the same roof, still living side by side. But now they were more fragile than ever, two people who had almost found something real, now standing at the edge of losing it. And neither of them knew if love was strong enough to survive that silence again. Days turned into weeks. And the silence between Emily and Aiden became a third person in the house, watching, weighing every move they made. It wasn't cold silence like it once had been. This time, it was thick with everything they didn't know how to say. Aiden still left coffee for her in the mornings. Emily still cooked enough for two. But they moved around each other like shadows, careful, quiet, aching. Neither of them had made the choice to walk away, but neither of them had said the words. That mattered either. Emily wanted to believe what they had was real, that the nights they shared and the moments they built meant more than a name on his phone. But the truth was, betrayal doesn't always come like thunder. It sometimes shows up in silence, in things left unsaid, in the spaces where honesty should have lived. And for a woman like her, who had once been burned by someone's lies, even half-truths felt like fire. Still, she missed him. God, she missed him. His laugh, his scent. The way he listened, like every word she said mattered. But every time she thought of Sophie, that message, that missing piece of his heart he never offered, hurt, pulled her back. Aiden, on the other hand, was drowning in guilt. He hadn't cheated, not physically. But he knew he should have been honest about Sophie from the beginning. Sophie wasn't some great love or secret affair. She was a mistake, a short-lived comfort during a dark time. Someone he hooked up with a few times while trying to feel something again. But when Emily moved in, everything changed. Suddenly, his world had color again. Suddenly, he didn't feel like a ghost, but he was scared. Scared to admit he wasn't sure if he was ready to fall again. Scared that if he leaned in too fast, it would all fall apart. And so he held on to Sophie's number like a bad habit he didn't know how to quit. A part of him hoped Emily would never find out. But now she had dawned. The price was distance. Not just physical, but emotional. A wall he couldn't break with flowers or dinners or sweet notes. He had to earn her trust again. Not by saying he cared, but by showing her with patience, with presence, and with real effort. It was a quiet Sunday when everything finally cracked open. Emily was folding laundry in the living room when Aiden walked in, holding something in his hand, a photo. It was a picture of Claire, his late fiancée. He sat down across from her and said softly, "I need to tell you something. Not because I expect you to forgive me. Oh, because you deserve the truth." She looked at him, guarded but listening. He went on to tell her everything, not just about Sophie, but about how he'd been carrying Claire's memory like a ghost in his chest. How he'd felt guilty for being alive when she wasn't. How meeting Emily had been the first time in 3 years he'd actually felt something like peace. And how that scared him more than anything. "I didn't tell you about Sophie because I didn't think she mattered," he said, "but now I know. The truth isn't just about the past. It's about giving someone your whole heart. And I failed at that." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. She just sat there, staring at the man who had once held her in his arms like she was something precious. And now, here he was, broken, real, and finally honest. Her voice was quiet, steady. "I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you to let me in. I've been lied to before. I've been left. I can survive it again. But I won't stay where I don't feel safe." Aiden leaned forward, his voice shaking. "I want to fight for this, Emily, for you. I'm not going to ask you to forget what I did. I just want the chance to prove that I'm not that man anymore." And in that moment, something softened. Not everything was fixed. Not every scar disappeared, but a door opened again. Because love isn't about never messing up. It's about what you do after. How you show up. How you make it right. Over the next few days, they slowly began to rebuild. No dramatic gestures, no grand confessions, just small things. Shared meals, evening walks. A deep conversation that led to laughter and ended in a long, quiet hug. The kind of closeness that doesn't rush, that lets healing happen naturally. Emily still had her doubts. Aiden still had his guilt. But what they had now was a choice to stay, to work, to believe that maybe love isn't perfect. But it's worth the risk. And when he kissed her again weeks after that painful conversation, wasn't desperate or apologetic. It was steady, intentional, like a man finally ready to give all of himself. And when Emily kissed him back, it wasn't forgiveness, it was permission. To move forward, together. Asterisk by the time spring touched the city with warmer mornings and soft, golden evenings, something had quietly shifted between Emily and Aiden. Not in the loud, dramatic way people expect love to arrive, but in the slow, honest way it grows when two people have chosen to stay after the hurt, after the silence, after everything that almost broke them. The house no longer felt like two separate lives under one roof. Now it felt like a shared rhythm. Morning coffee together wasn't just routine. It was a ritual, a small reminder that they were still trying. Late-night talks curled under blankets became deeper, braver. They laughed more, they touched more. They trusted more. And every time Aiden looked at Emily, it wasn't just with affection, it was with respect, with humility, with gratitude. He knew he had almost lost her. Knew it too. But somehow through all the pain and missteps, something real had bloomed between them. Not a perfect love story, but a human one. One rooted in truth, in effort, in 1,000 small choices to love each other better. One evening, as they stood in the kitchen cooking dinner side by side, music playing low in the background, Emily looked over at Aiden and said something simple but powerful. "You feel like home now." He stopped, spoon in hand, eyes meeting hers with that deep, quiet intensity she'd come to know. "You are my home," he said, voice rough with feeling. And in that moment, everything felt right, not because it was easy, but because they had earned it. The relationship wasn't without flaws. They still had disagreements. They still had their own healing to do. But the difference now was that they talked about it. They didn't hide. They didn't run. They leaned in. Aiden started seeing a therapist, something he'd always resisted before. He wanted to unpack the grief of losing Claire and make space for a future that didn't feel like betrayal to his past. Emily, too, began to confront her own fears. Her fear of not being enough, of being abandoned again. She let herself be seen fully, not just the strong parts, but the fragile ones too. And Aiden didn't flinch. He met her where she was. Every time. One Saturday morning, as they wandered through a local farmer's market, Aiden paused by a small vendor selling hand-carved wooden signs. One of them read, "Love doesn't have to be loud to be real." Emily smiled as he picked it up. He didn't say anything, just bought it, held her hand, and they walked on. Later, he hung it in the entryway, a quiet reminder of what they were building. But the biggest shift came one night as they sat on the porch, sipping wine beneath the stars. The night was still, the air warm with the scent of spring rain. Emily leaned her head on Aidan's shoulder and whispered, "Do you ever think about the fact that we started as strangers?" He smiled, kissed the top of her head. "All the time," he said. "And now I can't imagine waking up without you." There was a long pause. And then Aidan turned to her, his voice low, sincere. "I'm not afraid anymore. Not of loving again. Not of losing. Because even if something happened tomorrow, I'd be proud of what we've had. You taught me that I could live again, love again, and I want a life with you, Em. A real one." Emily's heart swelled, tears slipping down her cheeks, not because she was sad, but because she finally believed it. This was no longer just a story of healing. This was a story of becoming whole. And for the first time in years, she felt safe. Not because Aidan promised perfection, but because he showed up, day after day, broken, healing, honest, and hers. A few weeks later, they decided to move into a new place together. A place that didn't carry memories of what they'd survived, but instead held space for what they could become. It wasn't fancy, just a cozy 2-bedroom apartment near the park, with sunlight that poured into the living room each morning and a tiny balcony where Emily planted herbs and flowers. Aidan built her a bookshelf by hand. She framed one of his photos from their road trip and hung it above the bed. And together, they started writing a new chapter, not out of desperation or fear, but out of choice. They still had work to do. Life wasn't a movie. But in a world full of broken promises and fleeting love, they had chosen each other again and again. And in that choice, something beautiful had taken root. Not just romance, but partnership. Not just passion, but peace, too. Strangers had entered a house with nothing but their pasts and pain. But what grew between them was real, tender, fierce, and lasting. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it grows in the quiet and stays.